The chief stared across the smoky common room, his gaze resting on Owen. "You froze, didn't you, Miller?" he drawled, loud enough for every tired man to hear, then pointed at the singed helmet on the table. "That's a boy's helmet, Owen. A boy you nearly cost his life." The words peeled away Owen's composure, leaving him raw, exposed, every man's eyes a judgment. The chief turned, a slight, almost imperceptible smirk touching his lips. "Clean it up, then go home." The drive home was a blur of streetlights and the persistent scent of smoke clinging to his turnout coat. Owen could still feel the heat, taste the ash. The Maple Street fire had been bad, a real furnace, and Billy, the kid he had pulled out, was still vivid in his mind. The image of the chief's face, the words, they looped in his head like a broken record. He ran a hand over his tired eyes, pushing away the grit of the day, and pulled into the driveway. He found Beth on the sofa, her back to him, engrossed in her phone. The blue light from the screen painted her profile. As he stepped into the living room, the floorboards creaking under his boots, she jerked, her thumb blurring across the glass. The phone vanished beneath a throw pillow with a practiced, swift movement. It was a reflex he'd noticed lately, a new habit. "Hey," he said, dropping his keys on the small table by the door. He leaned down to kiss her, a tired offering. Her body stiffened slightly. She turned her head, offering her cheek instead, a quick, dry brush. It was a subtle thing, but the difference from her usual embrace, warm and immediate, was clear. He straightened up, the smell of burnt wood still heavy on his clothes. "Rough day?" she asked, her voice a little higher than usual, her eyes already darting back to the throw pillow. He nodded, running a hand through his hair. "Maple Street, kid almost didn't make it. Billy." He paused, waiting for the natural follow-up, the concerned question. Beth just picked at a loose thread on the sofa cushion. Her gaze was distant, not quite meeting his. This wasn't the first time the phone had taken precedence, or that his stories had been met with a distracted nod. The quick hiding of the screen, the way she clutched it, even the quiet hum of it vibrating against the fabric of her jeans, had started to set off a low, steady hum of its own inside him. A quiet alarm. "He'll be okay, though," she mumbled, her eyes still on the cushion. "Yeah, he'll be fine. Lucky we got him when we did." Owen felt the words hang in the air, hollow. He walked into the kitchen, grabbing a beer from the fridge. He could feel her absence even when she was sitting right there. He listened to the quiet rustle of her shifting on the sofa, then the faint click of the phone screen illuminating again. A few minutes later, as he nursed his beer, she stood up abruptly. "I'm going to take a bath," she announced, her voice flat. Without another word, she swept up the phone from the sofa, tucked it into the pocket of her sweatpants, and headed for the bathroom. He heard the click of the lock. He heard the water running. Then beneath the sound of the faucet, a low murmur. Her voice, indistinct, rhythmic. She was on the phone, in the locked bathroom. Owen sat on the edge of their bed, the sheets still cool and smooth. He listened to the muffled sound of Beth's voice from the bathroom, a low hum against the gurgle of water. A knot tightened in his stomach, a cold, hard stone. It wasn't just the phone or the flinch or the locked door. It was the accumulating weight of small things, things that shifted the balance, things that felt profoundly off. The Beth he knew, the one he was supposed to marry in 3 months, felt miles away, obscured by a growing distance. Later that evening, the air cool and damp on Doug's back porch, Owen nursed another beer. The crickets chirped their steady chorus from the overgrown yard. Doug, his best friend since high school, listened patiently, his hands clasped around his own bottle. Owen tried to make sense of the past few hours, picking apart the details, trying to find an innocent explanation. She keeps it close," Owen finally managed, the words tasting like ash. "And tonight it was different. She was different." Doug leaned forward, his gaze direct. "You think she's cheating?" The word hung in the air, stark and ugly. Owen felt it land like a physical blow, a punch to the gut that momentarily stole his breath. The world seemed to tilt, the porch railing swaying in his vision. He shook his head, a quick, violent motion trying to dislodge the image the word conjured. No, Beth wouldn't. She couldn't. The thought itself felt like a betrayal. He didn't want to imagine it, didn't want to give it any air. Doug just took a long swallow of his beer. Better to know now than after, Owen, before the invitations are out, before the ceremony. He gestured vaguely at the upcoming wedding, the stakes clear between them without needing to say more. Owen scrubbed a hand over his face. The idea of confronting her, of even asking, made his stomach clench. He pictured her face, her hurt, her anger. If he was wrong. What if I'm just paranoid? What if I'm inventing things because I'm tired? Because of the fire? Doug set his bottle down with a soft thud. You're not inventing the phone, Owen. You're not inventing the locked door or the whispering. Do you really want to wonder every time she takes a call in another room for the next 40 years? Do you want to live with that? The question cut through Owen's denial, sharp and precise. He thought of the long years stretching ahead, shadowed by that quiet suspicion. The thought was worse than the confrontation. No, he said, the word barely a whisper. No, I don't. He took a deep breath, the night air cool in his lungs. I'll talk to her tonight. Owen unlocked the front door and stepped into the quiet house. The dim light from the hallway spilled into the bedroom. Beth was in bed, lying on her side, facing away from him, her breathing soft and even. He saw the faint, telltale lump beneath her pillow, her phone nestled there. The sight confirmed his unease, hardening the knot in his stomach. He stood by the bed, the silent urge to reach under the pillow, to pull out the phone, to scroll through its secrets, a cold current running through him. He imagined the bright screen, the names, the messages, but the thought sickened him. It felt like a betrayal of something he still wanted to believe in, a line he couldn't cross. He was not a man who snooped. Not yet. Not for Beth. He pulled his shirt over his head, the fabric catching slightly, then changed into a pair of sweatpants. The couch in the living room was lumpy. The blanket offered little comfort. He lay there staring at the ceiling, the silence of the house amplified by his unresolved questions. The distance between them, between his body on the couch and hers in their bed, felt vast and real, a physical manifestation of the secrets that were growing between them. Sleep came eventually, shallow and restless. The next morning, the smell of coffee and toast filled the kitchen, a pretense of normalcy. Beth moved around, assembling breakfast, her movements brisk. He watched her, trying to find the familiar angles, the comfortable patterns. The phone was nowhere in sight, but its invisible presence hung in the air. We need to talk, Owen said, his voice level as she placed a plate of scrambled eggs in front of him. She stopped, her hand hovering over the sugar bowl. About what? She didn't meet his eyes, instead focusing on stirring her coffee. About how you've been acting, he continued, keeping his gaze steady. The phone, the way you hide it, the way you disappear into the bathroom to take calls. You've been distant. He paused, letting his observations sink in. And the other night when you said your mom had an anxiety attack and needed you to call her back immediately? She didn't. I spoke to your sister, Clara, yesterday. Your mom was fine. Beth's face drained of color, then a hot flush spread across her cheeks, a telltale stain. Her eyes finally snapped to his, wide and accusing. You're spying on me? She demanded, her voice rising, a sharp edge to it. Calling my sister? Checking up on my mom? Owen held her gaze. I'm asking for the truth, Beth. I'm asking what's going on. He kept his voice low, steady, not rising to meet her anger. We're getting married in a few months. This isn't how we operate. She laughed, a short, brittle sound. You're crazy, it's just wedding stress. And work's been crazy at school. My head's not always in the game. That's all. She waved her hand dismissively, turning back to the counter. I'm late. I have that early meeting with Mr. Henderson about the new curriculum. She grabbed her bag, her movements hurried, a clear attempt to escape. Beth, wait, Owen started, but she was already heading for the door. I really have to go, Owen. We'll talk later, when I'm not so rushed. The door clicked shut, leaving him alone in the quiet kitchen. He pushed his plate away, the eggs suddenly unappetizing. As he stood to clear the table, his eyes caught something on the counter, near the fruit bowl. Beth's engagement watch. The silver band, a gift from his grandmother, usually never left her wrist. It lay face down, the crystal hidden, as if discarded in haste or with intention. Its presence there rather than on her arm felt like a cold, heavy punctuation mark to their conversation. 2 weeks bled into a strained, uneasy rhythm. Beth's excuses became more frequent, more elaborate. School meetings stretched into late evenings. She would return home tired, withdrawn, offering vague explanations, always with a phone clutched in her hand or tucked quickly out of sight. Owen found himself watching her, every gesture, every fleeting expression, his suspicions festering in the silence between them. He felt like he was walking on a thin crust of ice, waiting for it to crack. One Tuesday evening, the silence in the house grew unbearable. Beth had called, citing another last-minute department meeting. He decided almost on impulse to drive past Elmwood Elementary. He rationalized it as wanting to surprise her with dinner, a peace offering. He picked up a couple of subs from the deli, their usual order, and drove the familiar route. The school parking lot was mostly empty, bathed in the pale glow of the security lights. Beth's small sedan wasn't there. He parked the subs cold beside him on the passenger seat and walked to the entrance, his heart a dull thud in his chest. A security guard, a burly man named Frank, was locking up. "Evening, Owen," Frank said, recognizing him from school events. "Looking for Beth?" Owen forced a casual tone. "Yeah, thought I'd bring her some dinner. She mentioned a meeting." He gestured vaguely towards the dark building. Frank shook his head. "Beth? Nah, she left hours ago, 4, maybe 4:30. Said her meetings were done early today." He clicked the last lock into place. "You just missed her." The words hit Owen with the quiet finality of a gavel striking wood. Her classroom window was dark, an empty rectangle against the night. Her car was gone. There was no meeting. He stood there for a moment, the cold night air seeping into his bones, the two subs heavy in his hand. The truth, stark and undeniable, was now a solid thing. He spent the rest of the week throwing himself into extra shifts at the fire station. The exhaustion was a welcome numb curtain, the physical demands of the job, a temporary escape from the turmoil festering inside him. He welcomed the clang of the alarm, the rush of adrenaline, anything to keep from thinking about the empty classroom, the discarded watch, and the lies that were slowly consuming his life. The guys at the station noticed. They were good men, most of them, observant in the way firefighters learned to be. They saw the way Owen's gaze would drift, unfocused during briefings, or how he'd miss a beat during equipment checks. Most of them kept their distance, offering a sympathetic nod or an extra hand with a heavy hose. They knew enough not to pry, not to ask directly about a man's troubles, not unless invited. Chad, though, was younger. He hadn't yet learned the subtle etiquette of unspoken burdens. During lunch, as Owen pushed around his lukewarm chili, Chad piped up from across the table. "Everything all right, Owen? You look like you've got trouble in paradise." He winked, a good-natured jab. Doug, sitting next to Owen, shot Chad a sharp look. "Mind your own business, kid," he muttered, his voice low and tight. He was always fiercely protective. Owen forced a smile, a practiced mask. "Nah, just wedding planning stress," he lied, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "You know how it is." Chad seemed to accept this, or at least he let it go. Later, when they were cleaning the truck, Chad sidled up to Owen. "My sister, when she was getting married," he started, his voice a little softer. "She was a mess, crying over flower arrangements, yelling at her fiancé about place settings. Completely unlike her. But it all worked out." He offered a small, awkward smile. "Just jitters, I guess." Owen appreciated the sentiment, the clumsy attempt at reassurance. He nodded, pushing the sponge over the chrome bumper. "Thanks, Chad." But the words felt hollow. He knew with a cold certainty that Beth's behavior was far beyond normal jitters. It was a calculated distance, a deliberate withdrawal, and the lie about things being fine was a bitter pill he swallowed daily. He was in the middle of a ladder drill, the heavy extension ladder biting into his shoulder when his phone buzzed in his pocket. He ignored it, trying to focus on the task, on the feel of the rungs beneath his hands. But the insistent vibration, a signal he couldn't quite shake, gnawed at the edges of his concentration. When the drill was finally over, he pulled out his phone. The text message was from Beth, short, precise, and entirely unexpected. "Dinner tonight, just the two of us. Frank's place at 7 o'clock. We need to talk." Owen's anxiety, which had been a low thrum for weeks, suddenly spiked. Frank's place. Their place. The small Italian restaurant where they'd had their first date, where he'd proposed, where they'd celebrated anniversaries. It was a repository of good memories, a sacred space, and now it was being invoked for a conversation that he knew, with a terrible premonition, would shatter everything. His hands trembled slightly as he tucked the phone back into his pocket. The rest of the day passed in a fog. The clamor of the station, the shouted orders, the familiar routine, all seemed distant, filtered through a thick layer of dread. He went through the motions, a ghost in his own life. During a review of the fire codes, his mind kept replaying Beth's text, the blunt finality of "we need to talk." Chief Miller, a man with more years on the team than Owen had been alive, noticed. He'd seen it all. New recruits, seasoned veterans, the ones broken by the job, the ones broken by life. He approached Owen as he was putting away some gear. "Owen," the chief said, his voice softer than usual. "You're off. Go home." He didn't ask, he stated. "You've got a lot on your mind. Family trouble, I reckon." He gave a slight nod, his gaze knowing, accustomed to seeing beyond the surface, to recognizing the quiet desperation in a man's eyes. "No good out there if your head's not in it." Owen simply nodded, grateful for the unspoken understanding. He didn't argue. He just needed to be out of the station, away from the watchful eyes, away from the expectation of normalcy. He showered quickly in the station's grimy showers, the hot water doing little to ease the tension in his shoulders. He pulled on a fresh shirt, dark blue, the one Beth always liked. His hands shook slightly as he fumbled with the buttons, each one a small, deliberate act against a growing sense of collapse. As he walked past the common room, Chad looked up from a magazine. "Looking sharp, Owen," he called out, then his brow furrowed. "Actually, you look like you're heading to your own funeral." Owen managed a weak, lopsided smile. "Maybe I am," he mumbled, not even sure if Chad heard him. He didn't wait for a response, just kept walking, the words echoing in the empty hallway. He arrived at Frank's place 10 minutes early, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the empty tables. He walked directly to their usual corner booth, the one by the window where they could watch the street lights flicker on and the world turn from day to night. He slid onto the worn, red leather, his heart beating a slow, heavy rhythm against his ribs, and waited. Old Frank, the restaurant owner, a man with wisps of white hair and a perpetual slight stoop, shuffled over to Owen's table. He'd seen Owen and Beth together for years, since they were just kids sharing a pizza. He set down a glass of water without being asked. His eyes, dark and knowing, lingered on Owen's face. "Rough night, Owen?" he murmured, his voice raspy. He didn't wait for an answer, just offered a sympathetic nod, a silent acknowledgement of the strain he saw, then disappeared back into the kitchen. A few minutes later, the chime above the door announced Beth's arrival. She stood for a moment, scanning the room, her gaze skittering over him before settling, as if reluctant. She was wearing the navy dress he'd bought her last Christmas, a simple, elegant cut that suited her. Her hair was pulled back, a few wisps framing her face, which was pale and shadowed. She looked beautiful, he thought, and profoundly sad. She walked towards the booth, her movements slow, deliberate. She avoided his eyes as she slid into the seat opposite him. The small table, usually a space of easy intimacy, now felt like a vast chasm. "Hey," she said, her voice thin, almost a whisper. "Hey," Owen replied, his own voice sounding hollow in his ears. A waitress appeared, ready to take their order. They both declined, saying they were just waiting for a moment. She left, sensing the unspoken tension. A long silence stretched between them, punctuated only by the clinking of silverware from other tables and the low hum of conversation. They talked about the weather, about a mutual friend's new job, about anything and everything except the one thing that hung heavy in the air, pressing down on them. Owen felt a dull ache in his chest. His throat was tight, dry. He couldn't stand it anymore. He took a slow, deep breath, trying to steady his voice to keep the tremor from showing. "So," he said, his gaze fixed on her downturned face. "What is it, Beth?" She flinched as if struck. Her head bowed further, her fingers tracing invisible patterns on the checkered tablecloth. She took a shaky breath, a sound that was barely audible over the restaurant's quiet murmur. Then, in a voice so low he almost didn't hear it, she spoke. I've been seeing someone else." The words hit Owen with a physical force, a punch to the gut that stole the air from his lungs. He felt a cold dread spread through him, a certainty he'd fought to deny, now chilling him to the bone. Despite his suspicions, despite the growing evidence, the direct confession was still a shock. A part of him had still hoped, still believed it was all a misunderstanding. He stared at her, unable to speak, unable to move. The blood drained from his face, leaving him feeling lightheaded. "It started a few months ago," she continued, her voice gaining a fraction of strength, though still trembling. "At school, a colleague." Owen felt a surge of pure, hot anger. "Who?" he demanded, the word a rasp from his dry throat. "Who is it?" She shook her head, her gaze still fixed on the table, refusing to meet his eyes. "It doesn't matter, Owen. That's not the point." "It doesn't matter?" he repeated, his voice rising, raw with disbelief. "He's the reason you're sitting here telling me this, and you say it doesn't matter?" A wave of betrayal washed over him, a deep, agonizing pain that settled in his chest. This was Beth, the woman he was supposed to spend his life with, the woman he loved. Her voice cracked. I know how it sounds. I didn't mean for it to happen, Owen. I got lost." Her eyes finally lifted, met his for a fleeting second, full of something he couldn't quite name. Guilt, sorrow, confusion. He looked around the familiar restaurant, at the other couples, laughing, talking, their lives seemingly intact. He thought of their wedding, the plans, the vows they'd practiced in whispered tones late at night. "Our wedding," he said, the words heavy with the weight of their shattered future. "Our life, everything. What about all of it?" Beth finally managed to meet his gaze, her eyes glistening. "I'm so confused, Owen. I really am. I still care about you, I do. But I'm just drawn to him. It just happened." The waitress returned, a small smile on her face. "Ready to order?" she asked, oblivious. Owen just shook his head, unable to form a response. The untouched meal, a silent, empty offering, sat between them, a monument to their ruined future. The familiar smells of garlic and tomato sauce, usually comforting, now seemed to mock him, making his stomach clench with nausea. The confession still echoed in Owen's ears as he stumbled out of Frank's place. The night air was sharp and cold, but it did nothing to cool the raging inferno within him. Numbness had settled over him first, a protective layer, but beneath it, a furious anger churned, mixed with a despair so profound it threatened to swallow him whole. "Owen, wait!" Beth called from behind him, her voice choked. He heard the urgency, the plea, but he couldn't stop. He just walked faster, needing to put physical distance between them, needing to breathe air that wasn't tainted by her betrayal. He heard her footsteps falter, then stop. He didn't look back. He fumbled for his phone as he walked, his fingers stiff and clumsy. He called Doug, the only person he could think of, his voice raw, barely able to form coherent sentences. "It's over, man," he rasped, the words catching in his throat. She told me." Doug didn't ask questions. He just said, "I'm on my way." Within 20 minutes, Doug's beat-up pickup truck was parked outside Owen's apartment building. He walked in, his face etched was with concern, but he didn't say anything, didn't offer any empty platitudes. He just sat on the worn armchair in the living room, a silent, solid presence, while Owen paced the small space. Owen recounted Beth's confession, the words tumbling out, punctuated by ragged breaths. Every detail burned in his memory. Her downcast eyes, the shaky breath, the whispered, "seeing someone else," the dismissive, "it doesn't matter," when he demanded a name. He felt a profound sense of humiliation, a bitter taste in his mouth. He thought of all the signs he'd dismissed, all the excuses he'd made for her, how foolish he must have seemed, blind to the obvious. The feeling of being so utterly duped was almost as painful as the betrayal itself. "I could go have a talk with this guy," Doug offered finally, his voice low, a hard edge to it. His hands clenched into fists, a familiar gesture of loyalty and protection. Owen shook his head, the movement weary. No more violence. It won't fix anything." He just wanted it to be over, cleanly, quickly, even if that meant a deeper cut. The next morning, the apartment felt impossibly small, suffocating. Beth was sitting at the kitchen table, a mug of cold coffee in front of hers. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her face pale. The pretense of a shared life had evaporated with the dawn. "You need to move out," Owen said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion, as if he were discussing the weather. Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with shock. "Owen, no, please, we can fix this. I'll end it. I swear, we can try." Tears welled in her eyes, spilling over. "Please don't do this." He looked at her, truly looked at her. He saw the genuine distress, the plea in her eyes. But he also saw something else, something subtle, a faint flicker of uncertainty, a lingering doubt that betrayed the conviction in her words. The trust, once the bedrock of their relationship, was utterly shattered, ground into dust. He couldn't unsee it, couldn't unfeel the cold dread that had settled in his gut. "No, Beth," he said, his voice firm, unwavering. "It's too late. It's done." He walked to the bedroom, pulled out a duffel bag from the back of the closet, and dropped it on the floor in front of her. "Pack a bag. You can come back for the rest later." The silence that followed was oppressive, heavy with the weight of shattered dreams, of a future that had just evaporated into thin air. He watched her numb as she slowly rose, grabbed the bag, and walked into the bedroom. The sounds of her packing were muffled, punctuated by soft, ragged sobs. He heard the rustle of clothes, the clinking of toiletries. When she emerged, her face was streaked with tears, her eyes swollen. She held the duffel bag tightly. As she passed the kitchen counter, Owen's gaze fell on the engagement watch. It lay there where she'd left it 2 nights ago, face down, a cold silver symbol of broken time. She glanced at it, her lip trembling, then turned and walked out the door without another word. The click of the lock resonated through the now empty apartment. An oppressive quiet settled, vast and echoing. Owen walked to the counter, picked up the watch. It felt heavy in his palm, cold. A constant reminder of a promise unkept, a future undone. He slipped it into his pocket, out of sight, but not out of mind. It's in these quiet, devastating moments, when everything you thought you knew collapses, that you realize how profoundly life's costly choices unfold. He sought solace in his work. He dove into extra shifts, volunteered for every call. The roar of the fire, the urgent shouts of his crew, the physical exhaustion of battling the flames, it was all a welcome distraction. But even amidst the inferno, the fires he fought now felt like echoes of his own internal turmoil, consuming, destructive, leaving only ashes and a lingering, acrid smoke. The news traveled fast in their small town, a ripple spreading through the community. Owen felt it everywhere, in the grocery store aisle, at the gas station, even in the quiet corners of the firehouse. Hushed conversations would abruptly cease as he approached. Heads would turn. Sympathetic glances, heavy with unspoken pity, followed him. He became a fixture in the local gossip, the wrong man, the subject of speculation. Doug, always a bull in a china shop when it came to Owen, didn't tolerate it. He had a way of snapping at anyone he overheard whispering, a low growl that dispersed any lingering curiosity. Owen appreciated it, but it couldn't stop the undercurrent of judgment and pity that seemed to permeate the air around him. Beth's name, once spoken with affection and respect, now carried a different weight. As a beloved elementary school teacher, her standing in the community had been solid. But whispers, especially concerning moral failings, could quickly corrode reputations. He heard through the grapevine from a casual conversation at the hardware store that a few parents had started pulling their children from her class. Concerned about the environment, one mother had reportedly said. The scandal had begun to exact its price, not just on his heart, but on her professional life, on their shared world. Then, one evening, after a particularly grueling shift, Doug dropped the name. "It's Paul Larson," he said, without preamble, as they sat on the porch. "New coach at the high school, just started this year. Younger guy, heard he was fresh out of college." The name hit Owen with a fresh surge of bitter resentment. Paul Larson, a fresh-faced kid. The image formed in his mind. Young, confident, probably oblivious to the wreckage he'd helped create. A wave of anger washed over him. hot and sharp, the urge to confront, to demand answers, a powerful pull. But he resisted, digging his nails into his palms. No more violence. No more drama. He was done with that. He started seeing Beth around town more frequently. At the bank, at the post office, once even at the hardware store, a few aisles away from him. Her face was drawn, paler than he remembered. Her eyes, whenever they accidentally met his, would dart away quickly, full of something he couldn't quite decipher. Guilt, shame, perhaps even a sliver of her own pain. He never approached her, never spoke. There was nothing left to say. A few days later, an anonymous letter arrived in his mailbox. It was a single folded sheet of paper, typed, "No return address." He recognized the neat, almost meticulous handwriting of the typed address from some local busybody, perhaps a parent. He read it, his hands growing colder with each word. It detailed further indiscretions, not just the affair, but late nights, whispered conversations, rendezvous points. It painted a picture of a calculated, ongoing deception, not just a momentary lapse. The letter didn't reveal anything he hadn't suspected, but it solidified the depth of the betrayal, confirming the extent of the lies. He crumpled the paper in his fist, a fresh wave of nausea washing over him. The anger, momentarily dormant, flared anew, hotter and more destructive than before. Sleep became a rare commodity. He spent most nights staring at the ceiling, replaying conversation, searching for signs he'd missed, for clues buried in plain sight. He saw them now, of course, everywhere. The guarded phone, the sudden trips, the distant gaze. He felt a burning shame for his blindness, for his faith, for being the last to know. His performance at work continued to suffer. He was still physically present, still moved through the motions, but his mind was elsewhere, fractured. Another quiet warning came from Chief Miller. "Owen," the chief had said, his voice measured, "you're a good firefighter, but you're not yourself. You need to get your head right. The job demands it." Owen nodded, understanding the unspoken implication. Fix this, or you're a liability. He began to realize the true cost of Beth's actions. It wasn't just his pain or her lost reputation. It was a disruption that rippled through their small, interconnected community, eroding trust, forcing people to take sides, to whisper. It was a damage that felt far wider than just the two of them. In his off-duty hours, he retreated to his small garage, a dusty haven. He bought an old, rusty pickup truck from a salvage yard, a late 70s Ford, a shell of its former self. He began to strip it down piece by piece, sanding away the rust, replacing broken parts. The repetitive physical labor, the smell of grease and paint thinner, the tangible progress became a therapeutic escape. Each bolt loosened, each panel cleaned, was a small victory, a step towards rebuilding something from the wreckage. He realized he couldn't just wallow in the ashes. He had to find a way to move on, to rebuild his own life, one careful, deliberate step at a time. The ripple effect continued to spread. Beth lost her job at Elmwood Elementary. The pressure from parents, fueled by the whispers and the school board's need to maintain a semblance of order, proved too great. It was a quiet termination, framed as a mutual decision, but the meaning was clear to everyone in town. The coach, Paul Larson, faced consequences too, though less severe. He ended up moving to a different district, fading out of the local narrative, leaving only the residue of his actions behind. Owen felt a strange mix of vindication and profound sadness at Beth's downfall. A part of him, the raw, wounded part, felt a grim satisfaction that she was paying a price. But another part, the one that had genuinely loved her, saw the wreckage of her life and felt a quiet, melancholic ache. He heard through the grapevine from a casual mention by old Frank at the restaurant that Beth had left town. She couldn't bear the scrutiny, the constant judgment in every glance. She was gone. He drove to his parents' house one weekend, the familiar landscape of cornfields and quiet farms a balm to his frayed nerves. They didn't pry, didn't offer advice he hadn't asked for. His mother just made him his favorite casserole, and his father sat with him on the porch, watching the sunset, sharing quiet observations about the changing seasons. They had been through their own messy divorce years ago, and their understanding was a silent, comforting presence. there was no need for words. Then an unexpected call came. His brother Mark, who had been battling his own demons with sobriety for years, called to check in. Mark, usually guarded, spoke with a vulnerability Owen hadn't heard in years. "Heard about Beth," he said, his voice softer than usual. "Tough break, man, really tough." It was an unexpected source of empathy, a connection from a place Owen hadn't realized was available. His brother's own struggles, his own mistakes gave him a quiet understanding of human frailty. Chief Miller, a man who saw more than he let on, had gently suggested therapy a few weeks prior. "Might help to talk to someone who ain't at us," he'd offered, handing Owen a card for a therapist in the next town over. Owen, skeptical at first, went. He found himself talking, truly talking, about the trauma, the betrayal, the humiliation. It was slow, difficult work, but gradually he began to process the tangled mess of emotions. He started to accept that he hadn't done anything wrong. Beth's choices, her actions, had been hers alone. He wasn't responsible for them. He poured himself into his physical and mental health. He ran the local trails, pushing his body until his lungs burned, the rhythm of his feet on the earth a grounding force. He lifted weights at the station gym, feeling the strength slowly return to his limbs, a physical manifestation of his internal rebuilding. He sold the apartment he had shared with Beth. The process was quick, a clean break, severing the last tangible ties to their shared past. The money from the sale gave him a sense of independence, a clean slate. He started volunteering at the local youth center just a couple of evenings a week. The kids there, some quiet, some boisterous, reminded him of Billy, the boy he'd pulled from the fire. He helped them with homework, played basketball, listened to their stories. He found a new sense of purpose in it, a quiet satisfaction in helping steer young lives, even in small ways. He realized that while the pain lingered, a dull ache that surfaced now and then, it no longer defined him. He was more than a heartbroken man. One evening, after a particularly good shift at the station, Doug clapped him on the shoulder. "You know, Owen," he said, a thoughtful look on his face, "it's been a while. You should think about dating again." It was a gentle nudge, a quiet push forward. Owen felt a familiar pang of hesitation, the fear of vulnerability, still a fresh wound. But then, as he looked out at the setting sun, a small, unexpected spark flickered within him. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was there. He understood with a quiet clarity that forgiveness, even if not for Beth, was essential for his own healing. Forgiveness of himself for his own perceived blindness, for the time he had lost. It was the only way to truly move forward. Months turned into a year, then a bit more. The raw edges of Owen's pain had dulled, replaced by a quiet ache that surfaced less and less frequently. His life had found a new rhythm, steady and purposeful. The restored pickup truck, now gleaming in his garage, was a testament to patience and perseverance, a mirror to his own slow rebuilding. Then, one Tuesday afternoon, a letter arrived. The handwriting on the envelope was unmistakably Beth's, though the return address was from a town almost 500 miles away, a place he didn't recognize. His hands, usually steady, trembled slightly as he tore it open. Her words flowed across the page, neat and precise, but filled with a raw, unvarnished regret. She expressed deep remorse, acknowledging the pain she had caused him, the wreckage she had left behind. She described her struggles, her loneliness, the way her choices had unraveled her own life, leaving her adrift and isolated in a new place. There was no attempt to justify, no blame cast, only a stark, honest confession of a life altered, diminished. Beth asked for his forgiveness. She admitted she had made a terrible mistake, that she had gotten lost, not just in the affair, but in herself. She wrote about wishing she could go back, about the ghost of the life they almost had. Owen read the letter multiple times, the pages crinkling in his hands. A complex mix of emotions churned within him. There was the lingering hurt, a familiar pang in his chest, but beneath it, surprisingly, was a sense of pity. He saw the genuine sorrow in her words, the real consequences of her actions laid bare. He saw the person she had become, adrift and alone, and a part of him felt a quiet sadness for her. He considered responding. He drafted replies in his head, angry ones, forgiving ones, indifferent ones. But in the end, he decided against it. He folded the letter carefully and placed it in an old shoebox in the back of his closet, a relic of a past he was determined to leave behind. He knew with a certainty that settled deep in his bones that responding would only stir the embers of something he had worked so hard to extinguish. He needed to protect his fragile peace, the quiet strength he had painstakingly built. Through his volunteer work at the youth center, he met Sarah. She was a soft-spoken woman with kind eyes and a steady, calm demeanor. She taught art classes to the younger kids, her hands often smudged with paint. Their relationship developed slowly, carefully. There was no rush, no grand gestures, just a steady, growing connection built on honesty and shared values. She understood his quiet nature, his need for space, his slow unfolding. He was open with Sarah about his past, about Beth, about the broken engagement, the betrayal, and the deep trust he had lost. He told her everything, the raw, ugly details. Sarah listened patiently, her gaze unwavering. "Not every relationship ends in betrayal, Owen," she had said, her voice soft but firm, a quiet reassurance that settled deep inside him. The shadow of the past still lingered, a faint outline at the edges of his vision, but it no longer paralyzed him. He learned to trust again, cautiously, one step at a time, knowing that life was full of uncertainties, but that some risks were worth taking. He understood that while betrayal could leave a deep wound, it didn't have to define the rest of his story. At the fire station, he continued to excel. Chief Miller, who had seen him through his darkest days, now looked at him with a renewed respect, a quiet acknowledgement of the man Owen had become. His focus was sharp, his judgment clear. He was a pillar of strength, a reliable presence for his crew. He reflected on the idea of morality, of justice. It wasn't about vengeance, he realized. It wasn't about Beth getting what she deserved in some karmic sense. It was simpler and more profound. It was about living with the choices made every single day. Beth was living with hers, and he was living with his. The price, it seemed, was paid in the quiet, unfolding reality of their separate lives. 2 years had passed since the afternoon in Frank's place. The calendar pages had turned, marking the slow, steady progress of a life painstakingly rebuilt. Owen was in a stable, loving relationship with Sarah, a quiet comfort that had taken root and blossomed. They had built a comfortable life in the small house Owen now owned outright, planning a future that felt solid and, more importantly, honest. There was no pretense, no hidden corners, just the steady rhythm of two people moving forward together. He still thought of Beth sometimes, not with the sharp sting of anger or the dull ache of betrayal, but with a detached understanding, like observing an old photograph. He could acknowledge the person she had been, the part she played in his life, without letting it define his present. The emotional turmoil had receded, leaving behind only a faint, almost academic curiosity about how her life had unfolded. Doug remained a constant. Their friendship, forged in shared childhood experiences and then deepened by the crucible of Owen's hardship, was a steadfast anchor. He and his wife Karen often had them over for barbecues in their backyard. Owen would watch them, listen to their easy banter, and feel a warmth spread through him. "You look good, Owen," Doug would say, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Really good. It's good to see you finally content." It was a simple observation, but it carried the weight of years of knowing him. Owen knew he still carried scars. They were invisible, etched deep into the fabric of his trust, but they were there. Yet alongside them, he had found a quiet strength, a resilience he hadn't known he possessed. He was no longer the man who had frozen in the face of emotional fire, but one who knew how to navigate the smoke and find his way out. He sometimes drove past Elmwood Elementary, the building standing sturdy and familiar against the changing seasons. He'd glance at the brick facade, remembering Beth's passion for teaching, the joy she found in shaping young minds.